free trade agreement has been successful, but I will leave that to my colleagues who have a special involvement in their achievements. But I believe we had a trade of $350 million more or less in 2000, and right now in 2019, which is the latest date in which we have, a regular trade, it was $951 million. So I think it's something that it's important that we listen from the experts how we can evaluate these 21 years of the free trade agreement and what we can do to achieve more. So I invite Dr. Jaime Zabludovsky to join us. We're going to have 5-minute presentations by Dr. Zabludovsky, afterwards Ambassador Tal, and afterwards Mr. Tessel. They're going to give us a brief presentation, and then we're going to go ahead and have a discussion among the three of them. And of course, we're open to questions from our guests. Yeah. So Jaime, I would like to introduce Jaime Zabludovsky. He has a degree in economics and a PhD also on economics from Yale University. Mr. Zabludovsky, or Dr. Zabludovsky, started his career in the Mexican Central Bank, and then he joined the Ministry of Economy, where he was deputy chief negotiator for the North American Free Trade Agreement, which that in itself was something for the time, a very, very noble achievement. He was appointed Deputy Secretary for International Trade Negotiations, where he negotiated and implemented important free trade agreements that Mexico signed during that time, in which it was, I think, the most successful time in which Mexico achieved a range of treaties very important for us. And especially, he was involved in the Israeli one. Afterwards, he was ambassador to the European Union and also chief negotiator for the Mexico-EU Free Trade Agreement. After leaving the government, Mr. Zabludovsky he co-founded a consultancy which is advising governments and major international institutions and global companies on international trade and investment issues. He's also been, for a long time, the president of CONMEXICO. CONMEXICO is a leading trade association for global manufacturers of consumer goods in Mexico since 2007. He has also participated from the private sector on the new negotiations with the U.S. on the Mexican Free Trade Agreement with the U.S. Jaime, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Lourdes. Thanks to COMEXI. I salute our president, Sergio Alcocer, who I think is part of the audience. It's a pleasure to be with Lourdes and my friend, Ambassador Vital. It's also very nice to get to know Director Tessel. I look forward to have a chance to get to know him personally. What I would like to do in my opening remarks is to share with you some of the origins of the agreement, since I had the honor to be at its inception. And I'm sure that later on we'll have the opportunity to go over the figures and see what has happened in these 21 years of the agreement. And also, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss what are the challenges and the opportunities that we have ahead of us. Let me start with a very brief history of the agreement. The year was 1997. Herminio Blanco was the Secretary of Industry and Commerce, and I was his deputy in charge of international trade negotiations in President Cedillo's cabinet. Moshe Melamed was the Israeli ambassador to Mexico, and he was a very insistent and very perseverant diplomat. The first time we met, after changing all the traditional niceties, he confessed to me that his single most important goal was to achieve an FTA between Mexico and Israel. I must say that it was not the first time that this idea was floated by Israel. As a matter of fact, the late Shimon Peres visited Mexico in May 1994 when he was foreign minister, and every news clip of that visit highlighted Israeli interest in launching an FTA negotiation with Mexico. Therefore, Ambassador Melamed was just picking up where Minister Perez at that time had left off. Nevertheless, I was really surprised about the proposal, and initially I really did not know how to respond. We must remember what was happening in Mexico at that time to assess the boldness of this idea. We were just coming out of the tequila crisis, and we were in the very early stage of the implementation of the multilateral commitments of the WTO. And also we had at that time a very comprehensive trade agenda with our neighbors to the south, both in Central America as well as South America. Last but not least, we were trying to set the condition to negotiate an FTA with the European Union, which is our second most important trading partner. So to put it mildly, we had our plate full, and to be honest, we did not have Israel on the radar. But I offered Ambassador Melamed that we were going to evaluate the idea and presented to my boss, Secretary Blanco. When I got to see Herminio, I was really surprised by his reaction. I thought that Herminio was going to tell me it makes sense, but at this time we cannot engage ourselves into an additional negotiation. His reaction was the opposite. He said to me, Israel has the oldest free trade agreement with the US. They already have an agreement with the European Union. So in some sense, we want to learn from them and we want to follow their steps. But he told me, before going to see President Zedillo, we have to be sure that this makes sense to the business community. So in order for us to have the support of the business community once that we launch the negotiation. Therefore, he instructed me to go to Israel and organize a trade mission. So in August 97, I led a group of businessmen to Israel. It was the very early stages of the startup nation, and we had the opportunity to visit business incubators and to talk to the officials that were running those programs. No wonder the delegation came back to Mexico very, very enthusiastic. So we decided to take the issue to President Zedillo. Again, very much like Herminio, President Zedillo said, isn't free trade what we are for? Isn't this what we keep preaching to everybody? So as you can imagine, the discussion was over very quickly. With President Zedillo's mandate, Herminio invited his counterpart, the Minister of Trade and Industry at that time in Israel was a very well-known Natan Sharansky. And Natan Sharansky came to Mexico on April 1998 to launch the negotiation. I just realized last week that Ambassador Tal was part of that delegation, or at least was part of Sharansky team. So the circle is closing very rapidly because Ambassador Tal was also one of the founding fathers of this agreement. 2 years later, the agreement was signed in Jerusalem as part of President Zedillo's state visit to Israel, which, by the way, is the only state visit of a Mexican president to Israel in the last 45 years. This shows that the importance of FTA goes beyond the impact on trade and investment flows, as Lourdes said. And as Lourdes mentioned, today we have a very comprehensive and sophisticated political and cooperation agenda with Israel. But because an FTA brings the political and diplomatic relationships to a different level. And I think the agreement between Mexico and Israel is not an exception. And it proves how right were Shimon Peres when he launched the idea more than 25 years ago, and former President Zedillo when he reacted very enthusiastic to that proposal. I'm looking forward to have a very positive exchange about the future of our bilateral relationship. Thanks, Lourdes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zabludowski. It was really interesting to hear how, well, both your bosses were very interested, and they have well, they knew why. Of course, it was a great way to learn how trade negotiations have been dealt with the EU and the US, which we were about to embark in those negotiations. Ambassador, I want to present Ambassador Vital, which I hope he recalls. He must have been very young when he participated in these negotiations. But of course, I like to point out he has a law degree from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and also a master's in political science from the same university. He has been involved in diplomatic affairs for a long time. He has been posted in Brussels in different capacities. He has always also been posted in Rome and credited to the Holy See. He has been posted to the European Union in Brussels, as Dr. Zabludowski was also some time before. And he has been also a deputy foreign head of mission in Paris. He has worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in different capacities. And he arrived to Mexico as ambassador in December 2018. So he has been living interesting times. And I hope to hear his point of view of the bilateral relationship, but also of the free trade agreement. Ambassador Tal, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Aranda. And thank you also for pointing out some of the important landmarks in our bilateral relationships, which will very soon be 70 years old, as you mentioned. And speaking about political consultations, well, after a break of 4 years, we just had them on the 25th of November of last year. See, nostalgia. And I must say that a big chunk of these consultations of what we call the political dialogue was dedicated to economic issues. Now, Jaime, you are very generous, but I'm not really a founding father. I was merely a young legal advisor at the Foreign Ministry when I was privileged to be part of the big team of negotiators and came to Mexico in 1999. But it gave me a sense of the potential that really exists in our bilateral relations. And speaking of that, please allow me to acknowledge the presence of my very dear colleague, Mexico's ambassador in Israel, Pablo Macedo. Well, I must agree with what you have said, Jaime. To my mind, FTA is much more than just an agreement on free trade. It's a centerpiece, really, in building strong bilateral economic commercial ties and beyond that. Now, one could argue that bilateral economic interests can be also guaranteed through other means and other mechanisms, and could probably also make a strong case by giving some successful examples. Still, FTA is based on mutual political commitment. And again, Jaime, you described this, both regarding the Mexican and the Israeli side. It's driven by dynamic economic interests, as reflected by the private sector, strengthened by additional building blocks like protection of investments and networking between economic actors from both ends speaking the same language, better understanding of each other's ecosystems, all of that, and cooperation in innovation and entrepreneurship, which is also very important and significant. All that could be conducive to thriving economic relations. The Joint Commission of the FTA just held its fourth meeting last week on the 17th of March. And that was one of the mission statements that I got from my peers at the ministry, because here again, there was a hiatus, there was a break, and it was important to renew discussions on where we stand right now, and we'll have an opportunity, I'm sure, to elaborate on that later on. So, of course, you have advantages and disadvantages when it comes to FTAs. On the part of advantages, you can talk about increased economic growth, more dynamic business climate, lower government spending, foreign direct investment, expertise and transfer of technology, and all of that is very relevant to our case. And looking at disadvantages, they are, I think, less relevant to the relations between Mexico and Israel regarding job outsourcing or the intellectual property issue, unfair competition, etc. I think this is more through in different setups than ours. An important component, I think, when it comes to increasing our commercial ties, and we are ambitious. During the meeting of the Joint Commission, we set a goal of $1 billion. We are not very far from that, as you mentioned, Ambassador Aranda. But this is the next foreseeable step. It's important to bring down tariff barriers. That's essential, but it's not sufficient. You need to neutralize mental barriers as well. You need to bridge cultural gaps. And this is where the economy becomes part of a wider picture. How to bring both civil societies close to each other so that Mexico and Israel become associated to opportunities, to creativity, to vitality, to drive. Now, I'd already said you need a political momentum. When we look at the broader area of Latin America, Colombia is a case in point where our bilateral relationship has evolved very significantly and has allowed us to sign and conclude not long ago negotiations on FTA. Trust is very important. We know that from our own area of conflict, when speaking about the late Shimon Peres and the spiritual instigator of the big economic conferences of the 90s after the Madrid political process, what we sensed on the part of our Arab neighbors was the concern that Israel's military strength in the region would give room now to an economic drive. So what was lacking at the time was this confidence building. And now I'm happy to say that when you look at Abraham's Accords, the atmosphere is completely different. So trust is, of course, again, of a big necessity. A challenge that we know again in our region, but not only. We mentioned the European Union, which is our biggest trading partner, is how to separate between political considerations and purely economic considerations. And fortunately, I have to say that in the case of Mexico, I don't feel any resentment whatsoever. On the contrary. To sum it up, in my view, it's not only about mercantilistic considerations, but rather it's looking at complementarity, joint opportunities in a global setting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tal. Undoubtedly, it's not only the FTA which brings up all the relationship between Mexico and Israel, but it's a very good basis for the overall relationship. And as you say, it also between in private investors, trade, and in general, entrepreneurship. I would like to present Director Tessel to our friends who are in the audience. And Director Tessel holds a BA in Economic and Accounting and a Master in Diplomacy and Defense from the Tel Aviv University. He has been participating in the civil service for quite some time. At the moment, he's Director for Bilateral Trade Agreements in the Foreign Trade Administration, which is part of the Ministry of Economy and Industry, where he joined that ministry in 2014. Before that, he was the head of the Economic and Trade Mission of Israel to Vietnam, where he lived in Hanoi for 4 years. And prior to that, he was involved between the Israelis' relationship with China and India. Before that, he worked in the private sector in Ernst & Young as financial analyst, and he was also a former naval officer. I welcome Director Tessel, who is going to give us a little bit a longer expose of what is the free trade agreement at this moment. I give you the floor, Mr. Tessel.
Thank you, Ambassador Aranda. Thank you, Ambassador Tal. Not much left for me to say. Thank you also, Dr. Zawodowski, for the introduction. I will try to give an informative presentation for this. I will share my screen with you. Hope everyone sees my screen and full view. Okay, so let's take a look. So the unit I belong to, the Foreign Trade Administration, it operates an area of about 50 trade missions globally. Recently in America, we've opened, 4 years ago, we've opened our office in Lima, our office in Santiago, and we also closed our office in Chicago. The trend in the ministry is gradually withdrawing from developed countries, alongside opening new missions in the developing countries. And this trend is still continuing. The last mission that were open or declared to be open would be in the United Arab Emirates, as we had some warm up in the relationship with them. As our mission is supporting every aspect of promotion of trade and globalization, more towards the export, promotion of the Israeli exports to the world. If you look at the bottom left brick or slice, this is the division I belong to, trade policy. In our division, we're responsible for negotiating, maintaining, periodically updating our trade agreements, and also addressing some trade, other trade policy issues or other trade barriers. Of course, also using our big array of missions around the world. If we look at Israel's free trade map, so Israel has now 11 free trade area agreements in force that are covering about 70% of its trade, of its global trade. Not in the map, sorry, not in the map is South Korea. That the negotiation with South Korea already completed, and it's now awaiting for signing. Basically, all that remains is signed, and South Korea will be the first country in the Eastern Hemisphere to sign an FTA with Israel. Hopefully, not the last. Before moving to my next slide, I just want to bring to your attention that out of this 11 agreements, 4 are from last year. It is Colombia, that was signed long ago, but only ratified and entered into force last year, as well as Panama. And the most recent one is the agreement we have with Ukraine, a free trade agreement, entered into force 2 months ago. And you can also see United Kingdom in the map that due to the Brexit, we had to separate our agreements with the European Union to an agreement with the United Kingdom, which is now came immediately into force when Brexit happened. If we look at the future of Israel's free trade agreement, we see that there is focus on Asia. Some developed, the map, by the way, that you might not recognize is the Euro-Asian Customs Union, comprised of four different countries. In the Americas, we have Guatemala, hopefully to be signed on this year, by the end of this year. And of course, Vietnam, where I lived 4 years, and I hope also that Israel will conclude its agreement with Vietnam still in 2021. Some of the agreements or the negotiated agreements in this map are at its infancy, and there's some long way to go until it could be signed. I will move forward. Okay, so if we look at Mexico and Israel, free trade agreement, I think there is some delay. Okay, hope you see the right slide. So the agreement is one of Israel's long-standing agreements signed over 20 years ago. I mean, in force over 20 years ago. It covers mostly trade in goods and gives a lot of attention onto our rules of origins and the customs procedures. Since it's an old form agreement, it does not have parts that now Israel puts in its agreement, like trading services or emphasis, as Ambassador Tal mentioned, no emphasis on IP protection. But the coverage in trade in goods is vast. And I will explain. So if we see the main milestones in the life of this agreement, so it was signed in 1999, a year later it entered into force. And on non-agricultural goods, or as some may say, industrial goods, we granted full liberalization, gradual liberalization, whereas the final step already took place in 2005, meaning that for those of you in the field of trade and of foreign trade, chapters 25 to 97, all exempt, full tariff elimination. In 2010 was the last significant milestone of this agreement with the amending protocol for transshipment. The transshipment means basically that for certain territories, no direct shipment is needed as long as these territories are engaged with free trade agreements, both with Mexico and Israel, and subject to certain conditions, basically minimal change. As long as it follows the protocol, it could be considered as part of the FTA agreement, therefore granting full liberalization when entering into Mexico, enjoying the benefits of the agreement. As Ambassador Aranda mentioned, and also Ambassador Tal, free trade agreements are the highest form of highest level of economic agreements. And when Israel signs, and I guess this is also the approach within the Mexican government, when we sign an agreement, we expect to see potential exponential growth in trade. And since the trade in goods are normally the main pillar of these agreements, we like to analyze the trade. So in 2000, before the agreement entered into force, the total trade volume was $230 million, whereas 10 years later, it more than doubled. If we look, by the way, on the Mexican point of view, this is based on Israel figures, maybe the numbers in Mexico could be a little different. But for Mexico, it increased by tenfold in 10 years. I mean, the exports to Israel. And when we look at last year's number, we look at over $700 million only for trade in goods. So no doubt this agreement was crucial and imperative to strengthen the bilateral trade and bilateral ties. More recently, we also like to look, especially Israel, Israel's trade and business services, or I want to correct myself, Israel total trade and services accounts for more or less half of its total exports. So export of services is about 50% of Israel's total exports. So when we look at the trade and business services, we see a growth that is higher than the growth of exporting goods to Mexico. It's also important to Israel. In the future, maybe we will add when we update, we might add some chapters of trade and services and also investment, trade and services, as well as some other parts that basically could, I would say we can modernize the agreement in some ways. Another part in the agreement that I haven't mentioned yet is, of course, government procurement, that also regulated by a minimum threshold and entities in the agreement, in the free trade agreement. You can have a glance of the composition of the trade in goods. This is export, like Israel export to Mexico. You can see the composition. And with Mexico, it looks like this, imports from Mexico. And as Ambassador Tal mentioned, another significant event related to our free trade agreement was the recently had Joint Trade Commission under the agreement. You can see some media outlets of these agreements. Unfortunately, I couldn't come to Mexico City because it was held virtually. So I hope I can have another chance in the near future. Maybe we should have another trade commission next year, and I don't want to wait another 10 years to have the next Joint Trade Commission. And it was definitely an important part. It will lead to some, I hope it will lead to some constructive follow-up work, follow-up discussions under the working groups. I want to state that not with us today on screen, but listening to us is also our trade counselor in the embassy in Mexico City, Lior Yaffe. I asked him to share also his contact details mainly for the business community. If you wanna keep in touch with us, if you want more information, answers to questions, anything related to our trade. The role of the mission in Mexico is basically to connect Mexican and Israeli companies, but not only companies, also other entities. And it has also an experienced local team to support this activity. So you have my email, but more importantly, I hope you can communicate with Lior Yaffe, the head of the economic mission. Again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for listening, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much, Director Kessel. I think, well, the idea was to have a discussion among the three of you for about half an hour, but now we have a little bit less time. We will get more or less 20 minutes. But I will tell you some of the questions so you can also include them in your discussion. Some of the questions, and first of all, before I forget, let me just welcome very warmly Ambassador Pablo Macedo to this chat, which he could have very much participated as a moderator, considering his knowledge on the issue. And Pablo is a very dear colleague, so welcome, Pablo. So I would like to introduce some of the questions we have received, and if you can address them while you have your discussion. One is from Fernando Villar. How can Israel benefit from the USMCA? Is there any relationship or in any way in which they are related? There's also several questions about the increase in bilateral commerce in 2021. I think that's very much related to the global economy and how we saw the figures for 2020 and 2021. I guess they're going to not be very high, but I hope that they start growing. There is also a question from Ricardo Rochman. He asked if the FTA is now a bit more balanced on imports to Mexico from Israel, and if there's any effort from the Mexico-Israeli Chamber or from the government to promote more exports from Mexico to Israel. And so these are some of the questions, and I give you, well, I will ask that you, Director Tessel or Jaime to address. I mean, I think what are the bigger challenges the FTA has encountered I mean, it's quite a success because trade has increased, but I think it could be much larger success considering the importance of the two countries in the global economy. So I give you the floor, and I'm going to be very strict because maybe there are going to be more questions, around 20 minutes of discussion, please.
Lourdes, if I may start taking advantage that if we follow inverse alphabetical order, I might be able to start with a comment and then a question to our colleagues Yaniv and Ambassador Tal. I do think that trade has increased a lot, and the agreement has raised the awareness of the bilateral relationship. But I also think that trade still has a long way to go. If we take into account that the bilateral trade between Israel and Mexico is less than $1 billion, and $1 billion is what Mexico exports a day to the rest of the world, to all countries, I think we still have plenty of opportunities to take advantage. But having said that, I do think that trade figures underestimates what's happening in the bilateral relationship. And I would like to listen from Ambassador Tal and from Yaniv to know if, first of all, if we look at what has been happening in terms of investment and Mexican companies acquiring Israeli companies. We have this example 2 years ago of Mexichem, which is today Orbia, that bought a very big agricultural company in Israel. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had this news about Bimbo opening up operations into the Israeli market. And we also have had Israeli companies buying companies in Mexico. So my question is, what has been your experience, Ambassador Tal, in this year and a half that you have been in Mexico, COVID-19 considering? And is the lack of investment and services chapters, has that been a problem that has prevented the bilateral relationship from growing more rapidly? And if that's the case, are there any possibilities of a negotiation to expand the agreement and make our very important agreement a much modern one that would look very much like the USMCA or our agreements with other countries? So that would be my question to both of you. And I would like to try to answer one of the questions that was posed about the relationship between USMCA and the Israeli-Mexico agreement. Well, today there's a very nice piece in Reforma celebrating the World Water Day. And there's a full photo of a very nice Mexican avocado that is hanging like a piñata, but it's hanging like a piñata surrounded by Israeli technology that allows this avocado to measure the humidity and all the conditions that are needed in order to have a successful crop of one of the most important products that we export into the US. So this is a very clear example of the relationship between high-tech agricultural Israeli technology and one of our most important agricultural exports. And I'm sure that there are plenty of examples along those lines, but I would like to listen from Ambassador Tal and from Yaniv about the possibility of expanding the agreement and what has been your experience, particularly Ambassador Tal, in Mexico over the last year and a half.
Thank you, Jaime. Let's start perhaps with this big success story you just mentioned about Netafim, the world champion of drip irrigation, being bought by Mexichem, which is now called Orbia. And I had the opportunity to talk at length about this experience with Mr. De Valle. And he's really the best ambassador I could think of when it comes to promoting business with Israel. In this case, a kibbutz, but with Israeli companies in general and with Israeli entities. I think this is the challenge. I mean, we are constantly talking about Israeli high-tech miracle, startup nation, etc. How do you bring that into a feasible language when it comes to encourage Mexican companies to do business with Israel, to invest, etc. So we've been doing a lot, for example, organizing a virtual technological tour of Israel with more than 150 board members of Citibanamex, for example, just 2 weeks ago. We will have later on next week a meeting with Amexcap. The idea here is to involve much more venture capitals, private equity on both sides in order to identify together business opportunities. I mean, you need, of course, also the green light and the encouragement being given by the government. I remember listening to Laurent Fabius, who was the French foreign minister when I was in Paris. Our volume of commerce with France was about $3 billion, which is also quite modest, I would say. And he would go as a foreign minister into really the various stumbling blocks, the various obstacles that, in his view, were not permitting enlarging the volume of trade. And this is, I think, again, what we need to do. And I'm happy that during the consultas we had last November, Julian Ventura took it up. And now I'm sure that his successor will do the same in order to create this environment which would make business much more easier, whether it's soft landing of Israeli companies. And by the way, we are talking about hundreds of Israeli companies present here in Mexico, and same with regards to the Mexican presence in Israel. And Bimbo is again a remarkable example that should be duplicated. So I think that this is where we should put our trust, enroll partners in the private sector, and also look at, as I said, the more cultural and mental barriers that probably still exist in the mind of business people, both in Israel and here in Mexico. Mexico and Israel should become economic destinations, and this is something you need to work on.
Thank you. Director Tessel, do you have any comments or?
As per, I think one of the question asked is about expanding the agreement. As I said briefly in my presentation, we believe this agreement could be amended and expanded, and we can modernize the agreement in some cases, and it was also discussed, it is discussed between our ministries. Of course, negotiating or updating an agreement is not a short process. It needs to have support and commitment from both sides, and I hope to see this happening in the coming years. I think it has potential in granting access to more agricultural goods, to modernize some chapters in the agreement that are a little bit obsolete, that could facilitate the trade, the daily routine of the trade. Removing some more technical barriers, and create a good platform for trade and services and flow of foreign investment, as no doubt this is something that is happening and happened in the past years. That's it on that topic.
Well, I think something some of you have mentioned, and which is very important, and right now you went a little bit more deep into this, about the modernization of the agreement. And I think it has to be done. Let's say this is a first generation of free trade agreement, and that many changes have been done over the last 20 years. So, and I know it's complicated, and it's better if it's not broken, why fix it? But maybe, it could be useful to add other chapters besides that. I don't know if you could tell us more about it, Jaime, regarding your experience between the NAFTA and the new TEMEC.
Yes, obviously, I do think that having the kind of economic relationship that we have today between Mexico and Israel, there are some chapters that are missing in the agreement. Yaniv said that it takes time and it takes commitment, but particularly because of the nature of the things that we import from Israel, which are very intellectual property rights intense. I think at the chapter of intellectual property rights protection, obviously government procurement, because I would imagine that many of the things that Israeli produces are in some cases bought by governments. So a chapter in intellectual property right, a chapter in government procurement, obviously services are missing. Having said that, one of the things that I suspect is that the lack of those chapters has not prevented from businesses taking place. But on the other hand, if you have the right protection and the right legal framework, then these opportunities could be even greater. So I don't know what kind of political push you would need from the Mexican private sector, but I think that one of the things that we should be doing is trying to identify those companies and those businesses that are already doing businesses among ourselves, and have them push our governments on both sides of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean to have them move faster in order to have a much modern agreement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jaime. Yaniv or Ambassador?
Yes, if I may follow up on what Jaime said, and putting at use my modest experience in Brussels when I was deputy head of our mission to the EU. First of all, the FTA the comprehensive FTA that we had with the European Union allowed us also to expand and to become an associate member of the R&D program, yearly 5 years program. The only non-European associate member of this very significant program. So as we said, FTA is a trampoline which allows to upgrade relations also in other areas. Now, I will not, of course, be very adamant with regards to the future of our FTA with Mexico, and although I can testify to the fact that when adding some of these chapters or more robust chapters that Jaime mentioned, this might instill, of course, and revigorate efforts to increase the flow of businesses. But I think that we have already a very good basis, and the challenge is to convince potential business people that succeeding in doing business with a far remote country as Israel, in a not very known region, with probably obstacles, language obstacles, and other kind of obstacles, it is possible. It has been proven, and we need to duplicate those examples more.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Director Cesar, you have any other comments regarding this point, or?
No.
Okay. Well, there are several questions which are very, very specific, and I will encourage those who want to have a specific issues regarding trade issues, to contact either the Mexican embassy or the commercial attaché in Mexico, and I think that will be very useful, because we're almost running out of time. And well, I have the floor. I want Ambassador Roberta just asked me a question regarding how would you describe the nature and importance of bilateral relations between Mexico and Israel? How does it compare to relations with major European countries, for example? Well, at least for the time I was Deputy Foreign Minister, the relationship with Israel was very, very important. Of course, it was some very difficult moments in terms of security for Israel at the time, and there were important concerns which we had to raise, and it was a different world, I would say, and a different situation for your country, now different for now, but it has always played a very important role, at least from President Calderon and President Fox, which I worked for, gave specific importance to Israel and to the relationship. There's also a very, as you know, not so large community, Jewish community in Mexico, but a very important one. So they also play a role in the relationship, and there's also, I think, very, very close cultural ties between our universities, not only cultural, but also on the technological level. So I do believe there are, as important as with the European countries, very important ties between Mexico, Israel, or let's say not Mexico and Spain, but maybe Mexico and other European countries. And how do they compare? Well, there are different levels of dialogue, but I think we did have a very regular dialogue between deputy directors or directors and also foreign ministers on a regular basis. And there was also some issues we agreed to disagree at the multilateral level, but in that sense, we had a very, very respectful relationship, which I enjoyed very much working with Israel all this time. Unfortunately, we had marvelous ambassadors from Israel to Mexico and from Mexico to Israel. So that makes things easier for whoever is the boss in Mexico. I think, let me see, there's a minute for one more question.
May I relate to the intimacy in our relations, just very briefly, complement what you said, Ambassador Aranda. We mentioned the consultas of November, but on the 7th of April, we'll have a dialogue on UN and international organizations, taking into account, of course, the third membership of Mexico at the United Nations Security Council. We are preparing this dialogue with Undersecretary Marta Delgado, with whom we have a very close relationship. And I'm happy to say, I mean, you put it, of course, very diplomatically, and on some issues we agree to disagree, but I find we have a lot of common ground to cooperate also in the UN system regarding empowerment of women, for example, and gender equality, people with disabilities, etc. And we have some joint initiatives and joint events together with the permanent representation of Mexico in New York, and together with the people in Geneva. So the glass is definitely more full than it is empty.
Yes, Lourdes, if I may add something. You mentioned at the beginning that La Cancillería has a very special program with Israel, which is the Cátedra Rosario Castellanos. I think we have to talk a little about that, because if I understand correctly, it's a very unique program. I don't think that La Cancillería has a similar program with any other country. I had the fortune that I was, for 4 years, the president of the Mexican Friends of the Hebrew University, which is the counterpart to the Cancillería in Mexico, to manage that program. And really, it's a very unique program because once a year, and this was the idea, again, on the President Cedillo, when Jorge Alberto Lozoya was our ambassador in Israel, and he was a student of Rosario Castellanos, so he decided that the best way to pay homage to one of our excellent and most distinguished ambassadors in Israel, as you said, Lourdes, we have had very, very, very professional and very qualified and very top ambassadors, and Rosario Castellanos is perhaps one of the most clear examples of that. In this program, once a year, 1 or 2 Mexican professors go to the Hebrew University to teach about Mexico and Latin America. And this is a program that has allowed the two countries to be closer and to learn from each other. And I think that's the kind of things that we have to put in place, and to show people that trade is important, but not everything is trade.
Yes, I do believe it. I have also, when I was in Jerusalem, I went to the university and had very interesting consultations among some academics. But I think this is a challenge that I pose to you, Ambassador Tal and Ambassador Macedo. We should have a counterpart of this cátedra in the Mexican side. I think it's very important that we receive academics, and not only from education or cultural part, but also you have great scientists, which it will be very great to receive for some time in Mexico. So we should have something similar. I know it's difficult moments, money is tight, but Jaime may help you find some funding for this cátedra. But well, in this note, I would like to thank very much Ambassador Tal, Director Cecil, and of course, Dr. Jaime Zabludowski on this, on behalf of COMEXI, for this very, very interesting roundtable. I would also like to thank all the audience and all the very good questions you posed to us. Mr. Cecil, I know there's a request for your presentation. If you can send it to COMEXI, and if you agree for it to be distributed among those who want to receive it. Thank you very much. I don't know if any of you want to say something for closing. We are going over the limit we had of time, but it has been a very interesting conversation.
I'd like just to thank COMEXI for this prestigious venue and you, Madam Moderator, Ambassador Aranda. And thank you for tasking us with this wonderful idea, which I will definitely take upon myself to try and concretize with Jaime's help and whoever is ready to chip in, because it's really a wonderful idea. So thank you again, and hope to be in contact very soon with you.
Well,
thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And I'm sure you will be in Mexico pretty soon.
Okay, I'll seize that.
Very good.
Well, adios a todos. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.